Welcome to AASYP Youth Insights, brought to you by Import Export TV and ASEAN Australia Strategic Youth Partnership. I'm your host, Darcy Moore. In today's episode, we take a closer look at the last 12 to 18 months. How has COVID-19 impacted ASEAN international and Australian international students alike? What have been the obstacles, the challenges, the little triumphs? To shed some light on these, we spoke to Maria Callista, international student at the University of Melbourne, and Catherine Firth, long-time university industry professional.
I've been asked if I live in a hut. I've been asked how I know how to speak English. This is on the rare occasion. I've also been asked if I own a pet Komodo dragon. I think there's, cultural stereotypes like that. You do have to kind of keep in mind that not a lot of people get to travel and have the blessing to live somewhere else and fully experience life there. So my name is Maria Callista. I'm 19 years old and I'm from Bali, Indonesia. I moved to Melbourne about a year and a half ago now. And I'm actually here on a full scholarship studying commerce at the University of Melbourne. So the scholarship is for a disadvantaged Indonesian student, specifically a female. I was lucky enough to receive the scholarship through the kindness of my scholarship donors, Paul and Angela Wheelton. And I've just been loving life in Melbourne. It's been such a huge change for me coming from a small island, and it's taught me a lot. I've grown a lot personally and just in terms of uni as well and the content I'm learning. It's really been a push for me. Having grown up somewhere for 18 years and then suddenly moving, it's almost like this upheaval where everything's brought up from under you, your foundation, your stability, and everything you've known, and you relocate and move somewhere new, and everything's brand new, the culture, the way you interact with people, and you also don't have the same kind of foundation. I, for one, didn't move here with my family. I kind of just did it alone. And having to find my footing, it was like a huge deal for me to finally be independent. And definitely living independently has taught me a lot about myself as well. So it's definitely changed the view of myself. And just like my values. Melbourne is such an open-minded place with such great values in terms of being proud and accepting of everyone and anyone, no matter where you're from, no matter how you express yourself. And I found myself growing in terms of that. I definitely think I'm a lot more open-minded to people and where they're from and their ideas and how they choose to express themselves, which I really like about living in Melbourne and having gone overseas. Because it allows you to grow as a person. And when I look back on myself a year and a half ago, it's just this huge, it's a different me. It's a different person completely. I think embarrassingly, I used to be quite stereotypical at sometimes. It's just a bit of a myopia where I grew up. Yeah. There was 15 kids in my graduating class and everyone thought and spoke like each other, and you just kind of fit in and you follow the crowd. Whereas here, with everyone expressing themselves, like, it's so individual and people aren't afraid to speak as they are and speak for what they believe in. I found that when I was new here, I was pulling on the stereotypical thinking I used to believe in back home and speak with my friends. But now with people actually pointing out to me, hey, do you realize you're actually being a bit like this? Or do you realize you're using stereotypes right now and that's not true, or and just challenging my original way of thinking, I realized how ingrained and like almost flawed that kind of thinking was, and I started to really observe the world around me and start to question things a lot more. So it just pushed me to be a bit more open-minded and think for myself rather than following the the crowd or following what I used to believe in, yeah, it just pushed me a completely new way of thinking. Coming from Indonesia, from Bali, a small island, I've been asked if I live in a hut. I've been asked how I know how to speak English. This is on the rare occasion. I've also been asked if I own a pet Komodo dragon. I think there's, cultural stereotypes like that. You do have to kind of keep in mind that not a lot of people get to travel and have the blessing to live somewhere else and fully experience life there. A perspective of an international person. So in Bali, there's a lot of expats and an international community. But if you were to go there on holiday, you wouldn't really recognize that. You just kind of think, oh, everyone else is on holiday as well. But no. So there are systems and structures for international residents living there. And I have to challenge that stereotype that people coming from a less economically developed country or a country in Southeast Asia or Asian countries in general are not educated at an international school, are not do not live in a completely traditional manner. Like, it's a bit of both. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think as a third culture kid, you could say it's important to have people around you that get where you've come from, but it's also important to be able to express where you've come from and be open to educating people about that and help them understand. And yeah, just there has been some comments like that, but when you speak up, you'll find that people are actually, especially in Melbourne, are actually really open to hearing about and really interested in hearing about where you came from and what your life is actually like back home. So yeah, there's definitely been times where I've had to use my voice, and maybe that was a bit uncomfortable to begin with, but it turned out to help me integrate better, to express myself more, be more authentic, and be proud of my roots as well. And in terms of positive experiences, I definitely think being able to visit where my domestic friends live and kind of talk to their families, and it's just this beautiful, I don't want to say clash of cultures, but bringing together of two different worlds, and you both have completely different experiences, so you're sharing, and there's always an interesting conversation going on, and I'm teaching someone, but they're also teaching me at the same time, so it's this beautiful exchange of information that's happening. So for example, if I'm going to country Victoria and visiting my friends there, it's just it's a whole new world, it's a whole new perspective for me, and I'm learning from them and seeing how they live, and they're asking me questions about where I grew up, and it's just a cool exchange. As an international student, I was lucky. I was encouraged to critically question the details I was learning for whatever I was learning at the time. But in a lot of local schools or in a lot of Indonesian households, it's very authoritarian. You listen to the authority figure and you don't question. You don't, you just take what's been told to you and then you do. But when you move to Australia, it's quite different, and you're encouraged to question things. I mean, well, at least you're encouraged to be your own person. So I think that transition can be a bit tough, but you'll grow so much as a person because of it. So I think, you definitely develop your critical thinking skills a lot, which is not something someone from an Indonesian culture might always be used to. I'm very fortunate to be at International House, where we have systems set up in order to help us integrate and to give us information we need. But I feel a lot of international students, they stay in apartments on their own, and they choose to be very independent for whatever reason, for their circumstances, or just because that's what they choose to do. And this can be really isolating sometimes, I feel, at least from the friends I've spoken to or from the posts I've read on blogs. It's especially when COVID happened, it became almost like this mental health crisis among international students who were alone in their own apartments because they also didn't get the chance to socialize. So I feel it's really important to have a community for yourself, and that entails being proactive because the systems are in place at university and in wider Melbourne. You just need to look and be proactive about these things. So yeah, the solutions are only going to be there if you're looking. And for example, there's free counseling services. There's great events where you can go and meet people. Or for example, if you're in COVID, there's plenty of like call centers you can reach out to, or just Facebook pages where you can meet people who are going through the same thing in Melbourne that are from the same country as you, or from the same university as you. So of course, be safe about it, but they're there as well. The support is there. And also, well, at least for me, coming from Asian country, coming from Indonesia, it's an extremely laid back way of living in Indonesia. It's a kind of collective oriented mindset, and so family's always there to help you and people are always there to help you, whereas coming to Australia, it was you have to be very independent, and that was it was a temporary culture shock for me. But I think if you just kind of accept, and also we're growing up when we come to university as well, so if you just kind of accept and choose to learn and take it as a learning experience rather than kind of shying away from a growth opportunity, then you'll be fine. It's just kind of going through the initial shock of something so different and not having, you know, your mom or your dad or your sister or your best friends for time, because of time differences or because just distance, they're not around. You don't have them to immediately go to for support or for advice, and you just kind of have to be self-reliant and proactive, and that was a bit of a challenge. It's too life-changing of an experience that you're sharing with everyone who's just moved to not have almost a special resonance with them. And the kind of quote at International House is, you'll never need Airbnb again, because you just know people from all over the world. And you do. I mean, I've run into International House alumni, and they've said how they're still best friends with the people they went to International House with. And I definitely think a lot of people here have played a really important role in my development and growth, that I wouldn't want to lose touch with them. You know, it's a true friend that when you talk to them and it's like things haven't changed. And so I think that'll be the case with a lot of people here who I've developed a true connection with, that I'll talk to them and it'll be like things haven't changed. And it's just about making the call and picking up the phone every now and then to remind them that you still care and you're still there. And also just, a lot of people have been like, oh, when I come to Bali, you'll be here. And I'm like, of course. And just, I guess, I'm so excited to welcome people to my culture there and show them around. So that'll be great fun. And of course, they've extended the invitation back. There'll definitely be some traveling and meeting up while traveling in the equation. If you're contemplating on whether or not coming to Australia, coming to Melbourne will be worth it, it will be, and it will be life-changing, and you'll grow so much. And I definitely recommend it for anyone who is looking for a kind of international community. Like, this is the place to be. And yeah, it might be a little bit hard at first, but you'll find your footing and you'll be a better person. And you'll be improved because of the challenges and all the growth. So yeah, come join us.
Maria Callista there, student resident at International House, University of Melbourne. You're watching AASYP Youth Insights, proudly brought to you by Import Export TV and ASEAN Australia Strategic Youth Partnership. I'm Darcy Moore. We'll be back after a short break.
Do you know that every product you've ever purchased has a history and an impact on people and the planet? Even the clothes you're wearing right now. Did you ever consider who made them and what goes on through the supply chain? What about the cotton, fabric or dyes used in the production process? Then there's the packaging, shipping and distribution. Finally, how will you even dispose of them once you're done? Now, not only consumers but governments all around the world are asking these same questions too. It's time to invest in a sustainable legacy to change the world for the better. Are you ready to be part of the ethical and sustainable supply chain revolution? Join us in making a difference for the better.
The last 18 to 24 months have been a challenging time for ASEAN international students in Australia and Australian domestic students whose international exchange to the ASEAN region has been seriously disrupted. University professionals are well placed to observe these changes and challenges at close quarters. To shed some light on these and to share her own personal journey, I sat down with Catherine Firth a little earlier. Well, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me on. It's a real pleasure.
And a pleasure to have you. And it's really rare that we get to chat with a professional who's also had a lived experience. And maybe we could start with your story and your experience growing up in Hong Kong and the UK and how that informs what you do for your work day in, day out today.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes. It's also unusual that I talk about my professional work that also kind of goes right back to when I was born. So I was born here in Australia. My family moved a lot for my parents' work. So I lived in regional areas, in metropolitan areas, in Western Australia, Victoria, and the Northern Territory. And then when I was 10, my family moved to Hong Kong. And we lived there for I was there for the next 7-8 years. My family was there for even longer. So my whole teenage years, my whole secondary schooling happened in Hong Kong, which was a fantastic opportunity, something I really enjoyed. At the end of that time, it was time to go to uni. I got a place at the University of Cambridge in the UK. So I went off to the other side of the world and was an international student in the UK. I then worked in London for 3 or so years, and then went back to university, still in the UK, at Oxford Brookes University, where I did my master's and my PhD, at the end of which my partner and I were looking at, our next career move. And we were really looking globally, and a really wonderful opportunity came up for both of us here in Melbourne. So I've been working in residential colleges and universities here in Melbourne ever since. And now that means I work at International House, which is part of the University of Melbourne.
And the International House is a particularly interesting project. It sprung up at a desperately disappointing and dark time policy-wise in Australia in the 40s and 50s. And perhaps you could give our viewers a bit of a feel for what that historical context was and how the International House project evolved over the years and in many ways has been reinforced in the last 10, 20 years.
Thanks. Yes. So international houses are a global movement, but International House at Melbourne is the first one of those in Australia. There's now another 2 or 3. It was opened in 1957, which is after the Colombo Plan, but well before the end of the White Australia policy, which went on till the 60s and 70s. So there was a real move among university students, university staff, the wider community, and the global areas. So the people who set up International House in Melbourne were University of Melbourne students and staff. The Melbourne community got really involved in it, but also the Australian government and International House received support from Asian countries, including Singapore, Malaysia, and Sri Lanka, who sent money to build International House in Melbourne as a place for Australian and Asian students at that time, particularly to live together, to study together, and hopefully to build wider connections between those two communities. To this day, International House tries to have a balance of Australian students and international students. Usually that's about 60% international students. Right now it's 30 because of the closed borders, but still 30% of our cohort are international students. We usually have representatives from about 45 countries and regions. And right now, even with everything that's restricted, there are 40 countries and regions represented in residence at International House right now.
And we'll get to the ASEAN context of IH a little bit later. But firstly, I wanted to sort of talk about, it's no secret the last 18 months have been very difficult for us here in our little neighbourhood, particularly difficult for ASEAN international students here in Australia, and Australian students wishing to get to ASEAN nations for exchange and internships and all manner of things. Focusing on communication and cross-cultural engagement, as a professional, what changes, adjustments have you witnessed students having to make over these 18 to 24 months?
I think it has been hard, but I write a newsletter, which is a new thing that I started to do. Not yet, I usually would have gone along to dinner and made an announcement or something like that. And now I send out a weekly newsletter. And I say over and over again, we are so proud of you. We are so impressed by how you are resilient, how you're flexible, how you're not pressing pause on your studies, your life, your well-being, just because we've had to change or pause a whole range of things that we would have normally done in college life. So the play isn't on. We haven't done as much sport as we'd normally do. It's very hard for us to get together for dinner. But obviously, lots and lots of things have gone online. Our teaching's online. Our university teaching is online, but we also do teaching in the college. Students have been getting together socially themselves, so doing things like an online picnic and things that have been asynchronous as well. I think that's probably been the bit that's been really interesting. People, for example, at college did a Strava running challenge where you ran or walked just on your own and then logged your numbers on a whiteboard. So it was legal, it was safe, it was encouraging people to move, it was sort of digital, but also hybrid in the real world. You didn't have to look at a Zoom screen. And that was so inspiring, walking past that whiteboard every time I went in and was like, oh, wow, people have been running and walking a lot. And that was great.
And it's been particularly difficult here in Melbourne. You and I are both in Melbourne this morning, within walking distance probably of one another, but we have to do this interview via Zoom, this conversation via Zoom. Resilience has come up and up again and again among the international student community, particularly young professionals, but all of us here in the Victorian community. Yeah. What differences, similarities have you seen in the response, international students from ASEAN region and Australian students? And as a professional, what have you witnessed in the response side of things over the last 18 to 24 months?
I think it's very interesting the way that people, when they ask this question, which I get asked a lot, often come with stereotypes and assumptions about ASEAN students and Australian students and how some will be more shy or more outgoing or more, and I found it's completely not true. There are some cultural differences in the way some of these things are expressed, but when you get down to talking to students, working with students, especially international students, and our Australian students are students who've moved from their own state or from regional Victoria. So everybody's moved. Everybody's come to university. Everybody's come to Melbourne. People are having to live together in community, and none of us have been through a pandemic like this before. So we're all adapting to this together. And they've all got the same desires for connection. Everybody's a bit homesick because they can't visit their parents, even if their parents live 10 kilometres away in Melbourne. Like, everybody is, separated from their families. It's hard to get together and communicate with friends. Their studies aren't what they were expecting, but they still have those ambitions to be successful in their studies, to find a career that's worthwhile, to reach out and take initiative. I'm just really impressed by both the international students and the Australian students at how people are, pursuing their dreams, keeping up their relationships, looking after themselves, and really striving towards the future and a better future. And I think there's no difference when you get down to it about how people are feeling and about what things, are challenging.
But let's talk a little bit more about those challenges, particularly from the perspective of an ASEAN international student here in Melbourne, or Australia more generally, for the benefit of Australian students watching who might not be able to go on exchange right now, so they might not know what it's like to be an international student abroad in a foreign country, in a place where you might not speak the language like you do your native language. It's your first time there. You might not have family and friends there. What are the challenges like for ASEAN international students in Melbourne?
So the challenges, I think, are really unequally distributed. So on the one hand, you have students somewhere like International House. You've got housing security, you've got food security, you've got a group of people around you. When we can have, small bubbles of people, we do. When we can have whole of community things, we do. We, allocate buddies. There's a professional people who are reaching out every week saying, hey, tell us how you're going. What's up? There are staff who live on campus who are keeping an eye out. So those students are having the challenge of a new situation, all those things you said. It's new, it's a long way away from home, there's a lot of things that you have to do for the first time. I think people really underestimate how hard it is to navigate a healthcare system and a banking system. And, you've got to do so many steps to see a doctor before you're unwell or any of those things. So it's very practical, but it's also just exactly what you'd imagine. We also know about international students and ASEAN students in particular in Melbourne whose casual work has dried up, who can't get home to their families, whose families' economic situations have been really impacted by the COVID situation in their own country, who are experiencing housing insecurity, food insecurity. We're running a lot of food banks here in Melbourne at the moment, and a number of my colleagues at International House go and help out giving out free food to students, because otherwise they might not be eating enough, and often those students are finding their support network from other students from the same ASEAN background nations. So then you're not meeting the Australian students on campus, so the world is getting smaller and smaller, don't have a job at the moment. And so that is a real challenge. And that's another real challenge that I think is something to be aware of, but also to be aware that universities and the government and the wider community are setting up things like these food banks as a way of supporting those students. So not to sort of feel like you've been abandoned, but to reach out for help in the wider community, because it's a big challenge right now for a lot of students.
It certainly is. And you're in this unique position where you've had this lived experience, as we mentioned at the start, with being an international student yourself, and in Hong Kong and the UK, and very much being across the globe before settling down here in Melbourne in this wonderful role. And I wanted to sort of pick up on one more interesting topic before we wrap up today. There's a lot of talk around at the moment. We're losing a generation of Asia literate Australian youth and ASEAN Australian literate youth. There's a lot of talk about this, and it's a big topic. I wanted to get your take on it, and also maybe if you could add a few words as to what ASEAN international students, or ASEAN students wanting to come to Australia for international exchange and Australian students wanting to go the other way, what can they start looking forward to and preparing for now?
That's a great question. I'm also hearing a lot of that chatter, and I think it's rubbish. We're looking at 2 or 3 years, which is, it could be your full undergraduate period. So, it is a disruption, but it's not a whole generation. And your undergraduate years are a tiny drop in the ocean, a tiny moment of opportunity. I think even just talking about my story, there's the chance to travel when you're young, but then there's a chance to work internationally. So that's going to continue to be a really huge opportunity. There's the opportunity to do graduate study. The vast majority of our graduate students at International House are international students. Masters, PhDs, those are really fantastic opportunities to travel later on. But also there's so many other ways to connect with things that don't necessarily involve a full-on 6, 12-month, 2-year, 10-year residency in other countries. First of all, for those students who are currently at university, reach out to those people on your Zoom class, because an awful lot of those people, we have students who wanted to come to International House and are stuck, waiting for the borders to open. So they're studying online, which means your class right now has people living either in an ASEAN nation you'd like to visit or in Australia. Reaching out and making those connections right now is something that is just there every day. I think I'm also I grew up just on that cusp. When I left Hong Kong, when I first arrived in the UK, there was no internet. Even my friends who, were from Japan or Korea had trouble keeping up with the latest K-drama or J-pop, finding the food that was interesting and was their home food. Right now, all of that is so easy to get, especially in Melbourne. From International House, you can walk to the most amazing. Depending on what kind of Chinese food you're looking for, there's a better supermarket. There's the Indonesian supermarket and the Malaysian supermarket. There's an amazing, finding your food, finding your people, connecting with the cultural artifacts that you're interested in, and building friends around those interests is already possible right here, right now. So that then when you arrive in the country, it's not just that you have a grammatical understanding of, the correct way to say things in that country, but you also understand the cultural context, you're comfortable with the food, all of those things you have friends, all of those things are, I think, the thing that makes an international experience the thing that's really deep, really meaningful, really literate, and those things are available right now. So get out there and explore in your home turf. And then when things are possible to move, those opportunities are there already.
And we look forward to them. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us this morning on AASYP TV. Was there anything else you'd like to bring to the attention of viewers you didn't get a chance to say? Any final words?
I think I would also really say universities, every university has an international student organization staffed by amazing people who give wonderful advice. There are recruiters in every country, and everybody's a bit quiet right now. So this is the perfect time to ring up that university recruiter and have a 2-hour conversation and ask all of those questions, because everybody's got just that little bit more time and we're really keen to hear from you. So this is actually a really great moment to explore going on exchange, coming to Australia, being an international student. Yeah.
Some great intel there, because it's so hard to get even more than 10 minutes at peak times with university administrators planning that international exchange, planning that degree overseas, planning that internship. So once again, Catherine, thank you so much for your time and joining AASYP TV this morning. And we look forward to chatting to you in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and giving me a chance to engage and hopefully to encourage students who are watching.
Catherine Firth there. And we wish Catherine and her team all the very best for what will be a very interesting 6 to 12 months. That's the program. We hope you enjoyed watching AASYP Youth Insights. I'm Darcy Moore. Until next time, take care.